Welcome to Books Are Good Medicine, a podcast sponsored by the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux community, featuring books and other Native American-focused teaching resources. We are your hosts, Allison Waka
and Odia Wood-Krieger. We recorded today's episode on location during the Minnesota Indian Education Association conference in March. We were fortunate to have representatives from the National Indian Education Association, or NIEA, join us for that event, and we were glad to have them share their expertise on this podcast. Our guests for this episode are Dezi Lynn, Waquin Preston, and Helen Thomas.
Dezi is a former teacher who now leads NIEA's efforts to develop innovative strategies to recruit, train, and retain teachers to empower Native students. As NIEA's Tribal State Policy Director, Waquin provides support to tribes and Native student advocates as they collaborate with states on education policy. And Helen is an educator who oversees all professional development activities provided by NIEA, including virtual and in-person trainings.
We had a great conversation with these three Native education leaders. They shared recommended resources, professional development opportunities, and other recommendations for educators looking to better incorporate Native content and perspectives into their classrooms. We hope you enjoy. Good afternoon. We're so excited to have you. Folks, again, we'll see a little bit different location. We're on site at the Minnesota Indian Education Association Conference, 40th anniversary. We absolutely love partnering with NIEA in any capacity. So it's an even extra treat to have two of you, and soon to be a third when we swap Waquin out later, have us on Books Are Good Medicine, or join us on Books Are Good Medicine. And I would love for our listeners to get to, an introduction for each of you and talk a little bit about your work at NIEA.
Yeah, well, Twatoni Nishne, Keklai, Bashichin, Pliziklana Deshiche, Twatichini Deshanella, Dakelana Denasha, Waquin Preston Unishe. My name is Waquin Preston. I'm the Tribal State Policy Director at the National Indian Education Association. I like to think of my role as kind of providing a GPS marker for tribes, communities, our advocates who are working in Native education spaces, parents in terms of the policy landscape. So we're not the ones driving the car, I like to say we can certainly put out a GPS marker in terms of what our policy is. Exactly. And then it's the tribes, the communities themselves who are driving the car. Maybe they don't want to go to that particular marker that we're throwing at, but we're certainly trying to map out the policy space, where we are, our positionality with the larger education policy space, and trying to just help tribes, communities, parents get to where exactly it is they want to go. Then along the way, providing those tools and resources that power them along.
So I'm sure you were busy last year and maybe even busier this year for a number of things. So thank you so much for all of your policy work and navigating and pointing that ship in the direction that it needs to go, because I'm sure you've probably had a lot of sleepless nights lately. So I appreciate all your hard work. Dezi, how about for you?
Okay. Yat she Dezi Lynn Unishia. Edishkishni Nishle, Bilagana Bashichin, Ki Ani Dashiche, though Bilagana Dashanella, Beishhage, Begnasha. I'm Dezi Lynn, and I am from the Towering House and the Split Rock clans. And I grew up in an area in northern Arizona called Coppermine, or Beishhage. And I am the Educator Initiative Manager with NIEA. And I don't have a really cool analogy like that. GPS marker was a good one. I don't have a really good analogy like that. So with my role, we focus on how we want to recruit, empower, and retain educators that serve Native students.
Oh, wonderful.
And we purposely phrase it that way because there are now non-Native educators that serve Native students and Native educators. And our approach to both of those is different in how we give them the skills, resources, tools to best serve our students and to tap into what we like to call Native brilliance of our students, so that they have everything they need to be able to access that and really allow our students to shine in ways that they can, but often don't get to because of the system being the way that it is. So that's most of what my work revolves around, is trying to support Native educators in that space.
And yeah, as we sit here, there are over 1,000 attendees at this conference, and of course, they're not all Native, right? And so that's always the struggle. How do you make that balance? How do you make sure people feel included, and maybe not? Also worry about maybe they try too much, right? Like checks and balances, right?
Yeah. Well, you have your own conference, right? So, how many attendees typically are there for that?
So the actual convention that we hold is about 2,700 that we have. And that audience is very unique because it's not just educators, it's anybody involved in Native education. So anybody connected or related to policy, or our tribal leaders, or education department, state level people, district level people. So just anybody who's in any way connected to Native education attends that. We also have Educator Day, though, which is a pre-conference event that's fairly new. This will be our 4th year in Spokane.
And it's brilliant. So well done on that. Yeah. Brilliant. And I know you did a lot of heavy lifting this past year.
Yes, it's my big project this year for Spokane. And we've got so many great things coming up for it. But that day is entirely geared towards teachers, classroom practices. It's free. And so any teacher that wants to come, we're focusing entirely on how to make them better teachers in the classroom. So we have some great authors that we're going to that will be our keynote speakers coming, that we'll announce.
Love it.
Because it's going to be big. They're going to be big. We're really excited about who we're bringing in. Yeah. And we're hoping those will be our keynote authors, but we're also hoping to bring in other authors because we really do want the initiative to be, what do teachers have the easiest access to in regards to meeting standards, teaching standards nationally? And a lot of it is our authors, our Native authors and Native literature that's so accessible and so easy to work with for them to easily incorporate into the classroom. They don't need this extensive curriculum to start. They can start in that space with using those books and those texts at every grade level.
Well, I hear from quite a few library media specialists too, and that they really want to branch out and they just don't know where to start and so forth. And recently, even up in Minnesota, there was somebody saying they really wanted, where do I start? And I was like, oh, there's so many. The only thing is, it's just really hard because they're just not promoted as much as other non-Native authors, right? And so I really love that you're having authors and giving. And I feel like education is one subject that brings us all together. It everything intertwines with education in some form or fashion.
Yeah, all of the subjects, all the areas, all the categories, all the age levels of a child, roles that you can play. Yeah, there's so many different intersections in the education space for that.
Well, we had met with you, and you all gave us a book that was I don't know how you narrowed it down to one book, but you all did very good. So your book was Healer of the Water Monster. So that is a superb book. I really, really have to say. We listened to the audiobook and I have to rave about the narrator. If you have a chance, of course, pick up the book, but the audiobook is amazing. They just did a really wonderful job with translating the words. This person has to speak now.
Yeah, they do. They're definitely, in the way they're pronouncing the words, they're doing it correctly. Right. It's not somebody that practiced it.
Exactly. There are some audiobooks where you can tell they're not, first language. And so it's really well done. And it's just a beautiful story. My son and I listened to it in the car, and he would just be like, oh, just excited to hear what happens next. And it's just and the narrator does the work, the grumpiness of the characters too. And so, it's such a good book. It really, really is. So
I always admire people who can listen to audiobooks. They're a movie in my head. Oh. If I were driving, I'm like, I can't do it. And and then if my husband's listening to it and we're in the car, I fall asleep because it just becomes it just sends me somewhere. So whenever everyone's like, oh, audiobook, can't do it.
The one I couldn't listen to was Reading Sweet.
Oh man, Robin's voice.
Yeah, it was too soothing. I was like, oh, I'm supposed to be driving. And
I would expect Nate Graysmith's version. I would expect that would be the same.
This one is very entertaining and And we spend so much time in the car now, and so to hear a really good audiobook, and especially this one, Brian Young's series, he has a second one out now. I haven't listened or read that one just yet. I'm excited to. But it's a really well written book.
Yes. All of it's well written. And I listen to it too with my kids on the road trip. Both of them. We're very much road trip people and audiobook people for that reason. Yeah. Like I'll read books on my own, but I also have to listen, like I'll listen to books or podcasts while I'm either running or on road trips. Mm-hmm. And they're just easily accessible to my kids. And they're all trapped in the car. So they can't go anywhere. They have nothing else to do in the car but listen. So we listened to both of them in the car on road trips.
I have both on my shelf, and I have never read, and I even own 2 copies of one of them because I'm like, I need to read this, and bought it again. And I was like,
you'll really enjoy it. Yeah. It's so, it's really cute. I always, there's the part where he puts the horn toad to his heart or something. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, I just remember I was, visiting, we're in New Mexico, and my uncle Larison, he ran and caught a horned toad, and then he's like, "Here, put it to sleep," And I just kind of put me back to that memory where he made sure, we were like putting it to sleep, and I didn't know back then how special it was, until Brian's book, and I'm just like, oh, my uncle, he was like teaching, and he didn't even know it. He wasn't intentionally doing it, but he still taught you. That's cool. It's just really sweet. And so it's a really well written book, and entertaining, in a learning sense too. So you can learn about culture and traditions while being entertained. Mm-hmm.
Different levels of entertainment, different levels of teaching. Right. It's very multi-layered.
So it should come as no surprise that we love that you are recommending books. But I also know that many folks will collect resources and be like, oh, I don't have to do the work because I can just talk about this book, or I can teach this book, and I don't actually have to change my practice or pay attention to policy or anything like that. So, Waquin, I want to dip into your work a little bit and just be like, some of the things that I find really tough is there are policies come into place, but there's no stick or carrot. Like, we create these policies and we're like, we hope people will do them out of the goodness of their heart. And it doesn't necessarily maybe happen as quickly or as efficiently as we hope. So I'm curious to hear from you about some of your work with policy and how you shepherd some of those things in and work with community.
Yeah, I think you identified a really common problem, especially in Native education policy. One of the things I deeply work in is Native Education for All initiatives. So variety of states, 13, 14 have requirements from the state to have Native history, some type of Native content within the classroom, K through 12 public schools. And we often find that these are unfunded, either mandates or requirements. And the particular state that passes also typically does not have a associated required teacher training program, any type of professional learning that's required. And so as in the Native Education for All space, what we are typically doing is, number one, shepherding along those particular policies on the state level. Usually involves a lot of coalition building because as the National Indian Education Association, that national can sometimes scare people a little bit that we're coming in to dictate what should be happening at the state local level, when really we're just trying to provide those tools and resources at those levels. So we help to build these coalitions, help to facilitate the communication, do some advocacy training at times, just provide them with some technical support. Maybe they're writing a little briefing paper on what it is exactly they're trying to accomplish with their particular policy priorities. And then we work with those particular groups to lobby. Well, in the Native space, it's not really lobbying. We're just doing that advocacy work because, as we know, Native people have a political relationship with the United States and even the state. And so making sure that we're advocating on that level. But I think where where I really like to take the discussion, because we often don't take it there, is once you get that policy passed and sometimes funding, is having the actual practitioners, the educators, school administrators have where the rubber meets the road. I like to call it enactment because I view those practitioners as part of the policy process. And often we're either pitting them against each other because one group doesn't necessarily understand or is communicating with the other. You may have a very beautifully written policy, but in the attempt to enactment with the teachers on the ground, it doesn't actually play out in the manner that the policymakers may have originally thought. And because the educators are struggling with the either the confines of that particular policy, or maybe it's a little ambiguous as to the exact language in it. And so I think that's part of what we are attempting to do, is bring in that professional learning component. Part of that is knowing exactly what it is being required of when a policy gets passed, and then taking those requirements and handing them off to somebody like Helen, who will join us a little bit later, to actually build prescriptions for how in the classroom you actually are able to develop those professional learning plans, and then take it even deeper into the individual decisions that those particular classroom teachers are making. So part of it, I think part of the issue has been that we don't necessarily see policy as that larger ecosystem, and trying to bring that at the National Indian Education Association as part of our larger policy view, I think is something I've been attempting to do, whether that be with Dezi or with Helen, and trying to make that a more cohesive vision as what the policy process exactly is. So that's one of the kind of conceptual things we're looking at, and then trying to develop those resources and tools behind them. And one of those being a professional learning institute, particularly here for Indigenous Education for All. So I know Helen will have a chance to speak a little bit about that a little later, but I think those are some of the issues that I'm seeing and some of the ways NIEA is trying to address them.
Your enactment piece really clicked for me. What I see a lot is educators who have a whole ton of expectations put on them with no support. And then they just get tired and they're like, all right, I'm not going to do it anymore. If no one's going to support me, I'm just not going to do it. And then they blame everything.
Well, and in some situations for some teachers, that's their survival tool. And
right.
When you last another year, like they can't take on more. That's where they have to draw that line and make that boundary. Right. But I also think like in like the process of colonization in general, it's always easier to make an excuse to like justify not doing something and getting out of it than it is to actually own up to what you need to do and make it happen. And I think that both of those have a play in how educators actually enact.
You said it so much more beautifully than I did. Yeah.
And I think too, there's a couple thoughts that I have is that I think sometimes teachers or educators think, oh, I have to do all these things right now. And no, like step by step, your change doesn't have to be immediate and ultimate. Like, so just as long as you're progressing forward. And I think like it doesn't have to be overwhelming. And I think that's what y'all are here for, right? To help them take bites of it and digest and figure it out. And I really like the book, Waquin, that you I really enjoyed it. Like I didn't get I got a couple marked here, but one of the things that I really appreciate that it defined was talking about education for us was not, we already knew how to educate ourselves and we were very successful at it. And then, but then it led into talking about how they gave the excuse of, oh, they're trying to civilize us, but really it was colonization, right? I did enjoy this book. So it's On Our Own Terms. It's by Meredith McCoy. So she's Turtle Mountain. And then there was just this one part. I really liked even the beginning of it, talking about the Onondaga leader, where he goes and gets educated. And they thought he was going to be like totally colonized and converted into what was a Quaker. And then he went back to his nation and then used the education in order to get success for his tribe. And I just really love that. And I think that's where we kind of are in this area now where we have to survive. I think we're always been about survival, right? That's what my mom had said. She's like, the way we lived was we lived together as a tribe to survive, and we navigated and we moved and and now we have to navigate in this contemporary time. How are we going to survive in this? And he was a perfect example, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I'm going to take what they're giving me and then use it for my advantage and for my people. And I think so. On the flip side of the educators, like, what are we as families and students going to do? And how do we instill that citizenship back into using the education for ourselves? And so for like thinking of my son, right? Like, how am I going to make it? So I think it's already kind of there, but how do I embrace that and feed that and help it grow as far as, you're in school but what are we doing for ourselves and for our tribe and our people, right? And so I really appreciate your book. I probably wouldn't have picked it up otherwise, really, but it was at Birch Bark and I ran over there. And so I'm only like halfway through, but I really appreciate it.
Yeah. And I think that differentiation between education and schooling is really important. So just like you said, I think that's really important concept right out of the gate in this book is making that distinction that Indigenous people always have had a form of education. And now this other form of institutionalized schooling is doesn't necessarily erase that history, those tools, that knowledge, those pedagogical systems. It's a really important message, I think, to always remember that Native people have agency and they are also within those structures trying to do what they can. Of course, like I said, we can usually think about it in terms of context. Are the logics of containment or safety zone theory, where it's never usually enough, sometimes by design, if not always by design. But there really is always that, as the author kind of states, those archives of survivance, where Indigenous peoples are always trying to find a way, always being creative. They're always there. They're never fully erased.
Wow.
Yes. So many good analogies.
Yeah. So we did a quick little switch out. See you, Waquin. Welcome, Helen. So Helen, we would love introduction. Tell people a little bit about your work with NIEA.
All right. So I'm Petu Washte, Helen Wape Thomas Imachape Kishto, Malakota Kishto, Matakuye Chonte Washte Nape Chizapi Kishto. So hello, my name is Helen Thomas. I am the professional learning manager for NIEA. So luckily in my role, I get to work with Dezi and Waquin and basically everyone else on NIEA staff supporting with capacity building, training, workshops, webinars. Like, I get to do it all, which is really amazing. I introduced myself in Lakota. I'm Hunkpapa Lakota. I'm a citizen of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, and I'm originally from North Dakota.
We forgive you.
Right on the border, right on the border with Minnesota. I grew up in Grand Forks, North Dakota, so you just had to cross the river to get to Minnesota. But I'm based in Tucson, Arizona now, so nice. I live down south. And so that's my role. Is I oversee professional learning, and that touches all the spaces, but I do work really closely with Dezi because we think that empowering educators means connecting them to a community of other educators dedicated to Native education, creating spaces for them to learn, gain access to resources. And then I also work really closely with Waquin on Native Education for All, because NIEA has been wanting to move into that enactment space and thinking about how professional learning really can be a way to support the enactment, right? And not just professional learning in like a typical workshop training, but really creating experiences for educators to see the power within these Native Education for All mandates, the power of learning from Indigenous peoples, from Indigenous places, from Indigenous stories, so that they can then go off and really feel committed and motivated to, I want to give my students this experience too. So yeah, just very excited.
How would they find out about your
institute?
Yeah.
So to support Indigenous Education for All, we are hosting a place-based professional learning institute this summer, August 4th through 8th. And they can find that on NIEA's website. You can go to niea.org/ learning-for-sovereign-futures. But we thought it was an important name because we really do feel like these mandates hold the potential and the power to create futures where Indigenous sovereignty, Indigenous rights, Indigenous lands, and communities are respected. They are affirmed. And so that's what we wanted to name our institute, was that we're learning together for the future that we're hoping to create by enacting Indigenous education for all.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So it must feel like you're drinking out of a fire hose, right? Because like so much is happening and people are like, we need the things, right? Like you have to build the things, right? And so it's sort of like, you know, I kind of hate this analogy, but like the building the plane while you're flying it, people always say. And so you kind of rolled in hot, right? Like you got this job and it's just been whack-a-mole.
Yeah.
And so this is just one of the states, like Waquin said, 13, 14 states that you're working on. So we're really grateful to have you, you know, partnering all three of you partnering closely with Minnesota. But what other types of initiatives are you working, you know, outside of that and outside of the conference overall? Both of you can answer.
I think NIFA is what we call it at NIEA, is really a big focus for us right now because it is a policy initiative that has gained traction across a lot of states, right? And we heard from the keynote speaker this morning about Indian education for all in Montana, and that's been going on
Gold
decades.
Star, right?
Yeah.
Like,
and even in Arizona, where I'm based, where my career as a classroom teacher and a Title VI Indian Ed teacher, and then at the state agency there, we've had a mandate for Native education for all in Arizona for over 20 years. And most teachers don't know that it even exists. They don't even know that they're required to teach Native history. So I think we have been focusing a lot of effort on that, but we also do a lot of work around not teaching Native content to all students, but also how do you best serve Native students, right? What are the culturally responsive, culturally sustaining or vitalizing practices? And just like Waquin mentioned, NIEA is not necessarily there to tell people how to do that work, but rather gather, uplift the work that is happening and also connect people to the tools and resources that they could then adapt to meet their needs in their specific community. So a lot of the requests we get are around teaching and learning content, but also kind of pedagogical practices that could help support Native students in the classroom. And then we also have some other initiatives at NIEA that's focused on getting more community accountability, community decision-making input into schools through our tribal communities and schools program, which is a little bit more focused on the systems of support that Native students experience.
I always say best practices for Native kids is best practices for all, right? Like when you're in a traditional learning environment, like you have choice, you know, you can do your assignment in a different way, you know, the relationship is there. Like who doesn't want that, right? But this idea that we're somehow making it special for Native people just because they're Native, I'm like, we all need this stuff. Like everybody thrives in that. And so it's, you know, it can be sort of a double-edged sword when we're like, oh, best practices for Native. And I always am like, no, it's for everybody. But I also don't want to erase the fact that these practices are often traditionally rooted and community centered and, you know, but they're really good for everyone.
Yeah, I'll jump off of that just a little bit. The thought that when you say that, it kind of, so the way that I was taught is that our children are very special to us, right? And they're very they're a gift to us. And they come into this world and that's how we had always treated them, right? Like throughout our traditions, they were our world revolved around them, right? And I think that anybody would want that for their kids, right?
Like how different would this world be if every kid felt like they were loved and valued and at the center?
So every parent wants their, you know, kid to be special. And that's just bringing those traditional tools back into the classroom. That would be beneficial for everyone, definitely.
And I think just as you all were saying, we have there's a lot of push right now for evidence-based practices, right, in education. And we have the evidence. We have thousands of years of evidence that these practices
your books there
work. Yeah. And now we have more recent research that says that it's not harmful to any other students when you incorporate culturally responsive practices for Native students. If anything, it benefits those students, or it definitely doesn't negatively impact them when you incorporate those practices. So I think it's really important, and we have to be somewhat strategic, especially with recent shifts in policy and priorities, just around the way that we're framing these practices, right?
Lack of understanding about how to care for people, right? I think right now, there's so many triggering words that people don't understand.
And some folks are just trying to get through a news cycle, right? They're just like trying to get through their day.
So Helen, when we initially spoke, you said, hey, there's this one book, but when we talked yesterday, you're like, actually, there might be a different book I'd like to highlight.
Yes. And it's not out yet, but we mentioned Meredith McCoy, who's amazing, incredible scholar at Carleton College here in Minnesota. And I'm actually working on a book project with Meredith McCoy right now and Leilani Sabzalian, who's an Indigenous education scholar at the University of Oregon. And we're working on a book that is titled Teaching Indigenous Studies: An Introduction for K-12 Educators. So everything we've been talking about, that's what that book project is focused on. We kind of model it after the book Native Studies Keywords. It's from 2015. It's an edited volume where they look at different words in Native studies contexts. And so we're doing that, but for K-12 educators, because just as we're talking about kind of the anecdotal and real life evidence we have that these things work, there are so many amazing Indigenous scholars who are doing the research, creating the theories, writing about these concepts. But that's not always accessible to K-12 educators unless you're maybe in school or you have a connection in some way. It's really hard to get access to that research and that scholarship. So that's what motivated our book is we are taking a keyword approach, looking at words like land, sovereignty, nationhood, survivance, decolonization, resurgence, and defining those for educators through an Indigenous studies lens, helping them understand how Indigenous peoples are thinking about those terms, but then focusing even more so on teaching strategies and recommendations for here's what you could do immediately. Now that you understand sovereignty through this lens, here's not only how you teach about sovereignty, but teach through sovereignty. Like how can thinking about Indigenous sovereignty change the way we're teaching civics, government, the way we're teaching geography, all of these ideas. So we probably reference hundreds of resources, lessons. We reference this podcast in the book.
That just made my day.
We reference a lot of resources coming up from outside of Minnesota, not only because Meredith's here, but also because the state is really doing so much. And part of the reason we're doing the Learning for Sovereign Futures Institute here is because the goal of that institute is to really highlight the fact that I know IFA calls for tribally endorsed curriculum, and that doesn't necessarily exist yet, but there are tools and resources like Indigenous literature, right, that we can use right now. You could plan a lesson around that today and go do that. So our book is really hoping to make educators feel supported, giving them the language, the tools, the concepts to then go out there and just start doing Indigenous education for all.
I'm like, sold. When's this book?
It should come out in late fall of this year. I think you all should have Meredith on the podcast when it does come out because she's here in the cities. But yeah, we're really, really excited. For me, it's a huge honor because I'm not a scholar. My role on the little writing team is being the practical classroom teacher perspective. So we're really, really excited for that.
Awesome. Congratulations.
So maybe there's an early release copy in August when you're back here and maybe you and Meredith are both on the podcast.
That would be awesome.
Planting a seed.
I would love to do that. And I have to shout out Leilani's other book too, which also, I didn't bring the physical copy, but it also has beautiful ledger art on the cover, which I think is just meant to be. Her book is Indigenous Children's Survivance in public schools. And she's talking about stories of how Native youth navigate the challenges, the barriers, the stereotypes, and how they're enacting agency in classrooms. They're pushing back on myths, and they're redefining like what it means to be Indigenous in schools. And so this idea of how we've survived and we have the tools to continue surviving through these uncertain times, I think is a big theme, even in my just general life right now. Just like you said, Allison, like remembering that my ancestors have been through this and more, and we're going to be able to continue.
I was really excited about having the three of you on because I knew you would you'd nerd out a little bit on the books, and challenge accepted. And I appreciate that you did that. And I think we focus a lot on like K-12 resources, but also what are these resources that we can use to help educators think about things in different ways. And so really excited that the three of you you came to talk about some amazing books. And I'm grateful for that because I am a nerd at heart. So really, really love that. So I wish that we had hours to spend with you all, and just really grateful that you've traveled all this way. Fortunately, you didn't have a Minnesota storm today, roll out the white carpet for you. It didn't happen. But thank you so much for your work. And we look forward to collaborating with you in the future.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for what you both do, especially Allison. I love librarians. I want more librarians to come to our convention. So all tribal librarians out there, please come to NIEA convention.
And we'll be sure to shout out the conference and things like that to try and get more folks signed up. It's a good one. Spokane this year.
Yes.
Yep. All right. Thanks, group.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Books Are Good Medicine. Subscribe to our channel on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also visit our website, booksaregoodmedicine.com, to find episodes and resources, or to send us a comment. This podcast is sponsored by the Shakopee, Metawakan, and Sioux community and produced by Goff Public. Our theme music is Stomp Dance by Blue Dog. The opinions expressed on the Books Are Good Medicine podcast by its co-hosts and guests are their own in their personal capacities and do not necessarily reflect the views of any organization with whom they are affiliated or of the podcast sponsor.